I was 61 years old when a woman I barely remembered left me her wedding ring, her house key, and a note that said I had already been inside. That was in the fall of 2008, 12 years after the night in question, and 6 months after my wife, Ellen, had finally stopped asking me why I still woke up at 3 in the morning and listened to the hallway like someone was standing there. The woman's name was Ruth Mallory. I knew her from the pharmacy in Ashland, Kentucky, where I worked part-time after retiring from the rail yard. She came in every other Friday for blood pressure pills and cat food, though I never saw evidence of a cat. She was polite in the way lonely people get when they do not want to be a burden. She counted exact change. She always said, "You be careful going home now," as if the warning had personal weight. When her lawyer called, I thought he had the wrong Michael Hanley. "Mrs. Mallory named you specifically," he said. "For what?" "A personal bakas." I hardly knew the woman. There was a pause on his end. "She appears to have known you." The package arrived 2 days later. Inside was a plain gold band, a brass key, and one folded sheet of blue stationery. "Mr. Hanley, you came to my house once and saved more than you understood. I could not tell you then. I am asking you to learn it now. Ruth." I read it 3 times at the kitchen table, while Ellen stood by the sink, drying the same plate long after it was dry. "You went to her house?" she asked. I don't remember, but that was not true. I remembered rain. I remembered a porch light flickering. I remembered a little boy crying somewhere behind a closed door. And I remembered leaving before the police arrived. In 1996, I was 49, though I felt older. My father had died that spring. Our oldest daughter had moved to Lexington and stopped calling unless she needed money. Ellen and I were sharing a house, but not much else. I worked nights at the rail yard, came home smelling like grease and damp wood, and slept through most of the daylight. The night I first went to Ruth Mallory's house started with a phone call. It was just after 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when any ringing phone already knows something bad. A man's voice said, "Mike, I need you to come get me." I sat up in bed. "Who is this?" Static crackled. Rain hit the bedroom window. "Please." I made a mess of it. The line went dead. Ellen rolled over. "What was that?" "Wrong number." I said it too quickly. The voice had sounded like my brother Danny. Danny had been dead 8 years. Not dead in any mysterious way. He had driven drunk into a concrete divider outside Huntington and left behind a wife, a son, and a family that handled grief by blaming whoever was not in the room. I had blamed him. Then I blamed myself. Neither one helped much. I could have gone back to sleep. Instead, I put on jeans and drove. The call had come from a payphone near the old flood wall. I knew because we still had caller identification then. A beige little box with green numbers. When I got there, rain was blowing sideways. Nobody stood by the phone. Then I heard crying. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, crouched under the awning of the closed beauty school across the street. He had no coat. His shirt was wet through. "You all right?" I asked. He looked at me like he had been trained not to answer men. "Where do you live?" He pointed toward Pine Street. "What's your name?" "Eli." I should have called the police from the payphone. That would have been the clear thing. Instead, because he looked half frozen, and because his voice shook when he said his mother was sick, I put him in my truck and drove him home. That home belonged to Ruth Mallory. The house was a narrow white place with a sagging porch and plastic flowers in the window boxes. Eli ran ahead and opened the door without knocking. Inside smelled like cigarette smoke, damp carpet, and something burnt. "Mom," he called. No answer. A woman lay on the living room floor, beside an overturned lamp. Not Ruth. Younger. 30 maybe. She had one hand under her cheek and blood at the corner of her mouth. I said words a man says when he has no idea what he is doing. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Eli stood in the doorway, barefoot now, shaking hard. "Is she dead?" "No," I said, though I did not know. I found a pulse. Weak, but there. The phone on the wall had been ripped loose. I told Eli to stay with her and ran next door to bang on a neighbor's door. No one came. When I came back, Ruth Mallory was standing in the kitchen. I did not know her then. She wore a robe over a house dress, and her gray hair was pinned crooked on one side. She held a dish towel in both hands. "You need to leave," she said. "Lady, she needs an ambulance." I called one. The phone's dead. I called from upstairs. That sounded wrong. It all sounded wrong. Eli said, "Grandma, where's Daddy?" Ruth looked at him, then at me. "Go home, Mr. Hanley." I had not told her my name. Before I could ask how she knew it, headlights swept across the front window. Ruth walked past me, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch like she was expecting whoever had arrived. A police cruiser stopped at the curb. I left through the kitchen door. That is the part one never told Ellen. I told myself Ruth said help was coming, and it was. I told myself I had done enough. I told myself the police would ask why I was there with a hurt woman and a scared child, and I did not have an answer that would make sense at 2 in the morning. So I drove home. For 12 years, I let that be the end of it. After Ruth's package came, I drove to Pine Street alone. The house looked smaller in daylight. Most houses do when they've been carrying a memory too large for them. The plastic flowers were gone. So were the curtains. A realtor's lockbox hung from front door, but Ruth's brass key fit the back. I stood in the kitchen a long time before turning on the light. The house had been emptied except for a table, 2 chairs, and a cardboard box sitting in the middle of the living room. My name was written on the box in Ruth's careful hand. Inside were ordinary things. A child's blue mitten, a pharmacy receipt from March 1996, a photograph of 3 people at a church picnic. Ruth, the younger woman from the floor, and Eli, squinting into the sun, a cassette tape, a stack of police reports copied from old files. The younger woman's name was Marcy Mallory, Ruth's daughter, Eli's mother. According to the first report, Marcy had fallen while intoxicated, minor facial injuries. No charges. Her husband, Paul Mallory, listed as present. I remembered Eli asking where Daddy was. The second report was dated 3 months later. Domestic disturbance. No arrest. Victim refused statement. The third report, 2 weeks before my phone call, said officers responded to a complaint of a child wandering near the flood wall. Child returned home. No further action. The mitten made more sense then. Eli had been outside before. I put the cassette in the old tape player Ruth had left beside the box. Her voice came out thin and close. "Michael, if you are hearing this, I am dead or too tired to stop being afraid." I sat down. She said my brother Danny had once been friends with Paul Mallory. They ran together in the 80s, drinking, gambling, hauling stolen appliances between counties. Danny had broken away before he died, or tried to. He told me once, Ruth said on the tape, "If Paul ever came near his family, I should call you. He said you were the only Hanley who still answered the phone." I stopped the tape and stared at the dead machine. That was the first twist. The call that night had not been from Danny's ghost or from my imagination. It had been Ruth using Danny's name because she knew I would come. I listened to the rest with my coat still on. Ruth said Paul was beating Marcy and using Eli to keep her quiet. Every time Ruth tried to report him, Paul reminded her that his cousin worked dispatch and his drinking buddies wore badges. Ruth did not say all police were crooked. She was too fair for that. She said enough people looked away that the honest ones never got the right story. "I needed a witness from outside the circle," she said. "Someone Paul would not expect. Someone with a name he feared because of Danny." I did not know whether to feel used or grateful. Maybe both. There was more in the box. An envelope marked after the tape. Inside was a map drawn by Eli in a child's hand. It showed the route from the floodwall payphone to Ruth's house. A little truck was drawn in pencil, with a square man at the wheel. Me. Below that, Ruth had written, "He remembered you as kind." I had not felt kind in years. At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope addressed to Eli Mallory. "Do not open. Give if found." I took everything home and finally told Ellen the whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the kitchen table. "You left because you were scared," she said. "I left because I was a coward." No, cowards don't go in the first place. But scared men can still do damage. That was Ellen. She could forgive without letting you off easy. We need to find Eli, she said. We. She looked at the envelope on the table. You've been carrying half a story for 12 years. I have been married to the other half. Finding Eli was harder than I expected and easier than I deserved. Ruth's lawyer would not give me an address, but he agreed to forward a letter. I wrote 3 drafts. The first sounded like an apology, trying too hard. The second sounded like a police statement. The third was short. Eli, my name is Michael Hanley. I drove you home one rainy night in 1996. Your grandmother left me something she wanted you to have. I will not bother you if you do not want contact. 2 weeks passed. Then a man called while I was fixing a loose hinge on the basement door. Mr. Hanley? Yes. This is Eli. His voice was careful. Not cold. Careful. We met at a diner off Route 60. He was 21 by then, tall and thin, with Ruth's eyes and a habit of checking the exits before sitting down. He ordered coffee and did not drink it. I remember your truck, he said. It was green. Door squeaked. Still did until I sold it. That almost made him smile. I gave him Ruth's envelope. He did not open it. Did she tell you about my mom? Some. My mom died in 1999. I'm sorry. She got clean before that. For a while. He looked out the window at cars moving through noonlight. Grandma said you helped us. I left. Grandma said you brought me back so she could get me out. I did not understand. Eli slid Ruth's envelope into his jacket. That night, after you left, she told the police you were my uncle from out of town. Paul was still looking for me. If you had stayed, he would have known she called someone. He would have known she was planning. Planning what? Eli finally looked at me. She took me to Tennessee the next morning. I had remembered that night as the moment I abandoned a child. Eli remembered it as the night escape became possible. Neither memory erased the other. Both were true. Eli called me 3 days later. I read Grandma's letter, he said. There's something you should see. He came to the house with a shoebox and a manila folder. Ellen made coffee. Eli accepted this time. The shoebox held postcards. Dozens of them. Florida beaches. Smoky Mountain cabins. A motel in Indiana. A grocery store in Nashville. None had messages. Each one had only a date and a single initial. R. Grandma mailed these to herself from places we weren't, Eli said. I picked up a postcard from Knoxville dated 2 days after that rainy night. Why? So Paul would chase the wrong trail. The folder held copies of money orders, motel receipts, and school forms with false addresses. Ruth had moved Eli through 3 states in 2 years. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. She cleaned church basements, worked laundromat counters, and kept one step ahead of a man who believed fear entitled him to obedience. She never told me most of this, Eli said. I thought we were just poor. Ellen touched one postcard with her finger. She protected the shape of your childhood, she said. Eli nodded, but his jaw tightened. There's one more thing. From the folder, he took out a photocopy of a police memo dated 6 months after he disappeared from Ashland. It mentioned Paul Mallory, reporting a possible sighting of Eli in Knoxville. The tip had come from an unnamed local resident. Attached was a handwritten note. Not Knox. Look west. I knew that handwriting. Not from Ruth's notes. From birthday cards. From the few letters my brother Danny had sent before he died. The room changed without moving. Eli watched me read it. Grandma said your brother helped us before he died. I thought she meant with Paul. I kept staring at the note. Danny had been dead 8 years before the memo, so it could not be his handwriting. Unless someone else had been writing as him long after he was gone. The answer was in Ruth's wedding ring. I had ignored it because it felt too personal to examine. A plain gold band. Her husband had died in 1984. That was what the obituary said. Inside the band were 2 initials, worn almost smooth. DH, not her husband's initials. Danny Hanley. When I took it to Ruth's lawyer, he opened a sealed note she had left in case I asked about the ring. He read it silently first, then handed it to me. Michael, I loved your brother. Not cleanly, not wisely, but truly. Before Danny died, He found out Paul was hurting Marcy. He confronted him and failed. After Danny's accident, Paul began telling people Danny had owed him money. He used that story to frighten me. He said if I talked, he would drag Danny's name through every bar in town. So I stayed quiet too long. Then Ruth wrote that Danny had left her several signed blank postcards as a joke from their secret trips. After his death, she used them to create false trails when she ran with Eli. The handwriting on the memo was Ruth copying Danny's hand, because Paul feared Danny's old contacts and trusted rumors more than facts. The ring had never been stolen, and Danny had not been haunting my life through someone else. He had loved Ruth Mallory, and Ruth had spent 12 years using what remained of that love to protect her daughter and grandson. That was the second twist. The forgotten promise had not been mine. It was Danny's. He had promised Ruth that if Paul ever threatened her family, the Hanleys would not look away. He died before he could keep it. Ruth called me that rainy night because I was the only piece of that promise still living close enough to answer. I drove home with the ring in my shirt pocket and pulled into my driveway, but I did not get out right away. For most of my life, I had remembered Danny by the worst thing he did: the drinking, the crash, the shame he left behind. Ruth had remembered him by the promise. Eli and I went back to Pine Street together before the house sold. He wanted to see it empty. In the living room, he stood where his mother had fallen and looked smaller than a grown man should. I stood near the kitchen door, in the same place I had stood that night, and for once I did not try to improve the memory. I used to think nobody came, he said. I used to think I left before it mattered. He turned toward me. Maybe both of us were children in that story. I laughed once, quietly. I was 49. Still, before we left, he opened Ruth's envelope again and read me the last line of her letter. Forgive the people who came late, if they came. That line stayed with me. Ellen and I invited Eli for Thanksgiving that year. I expected him to say no. Instead, he came with a sweet potato pie from a grocery store and stood awkwardly in our doorway, like a man asking permission from a house. My daughter came too. She asked Eli about nursing school. My son showed him how to carve turkey without shredding it. Nobody made speeches. Nobody tried to turn pain into a lesson. After dinner, Eli helped me carry folding chairs to the garage. At the door, he took Ruth's ring from his pocket. I had given it back to him weeks before, but he held it out. She wanted you to have it. It belongs with your family. He shook his head. It is with my family. I could not answer for a moment. I keep the ring now in a small wooden box on my dresser, beside Ellen's old watch and my brother's last postcard. Sometimes I take it out and hold it under the lamp. It is only gold, worn thin by years on Ruth Mallory's hand. But when the light catches it right, I can see what she protected. Not a secret, a promise that arrived late, but arrived.